Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. To find out more about me and my work, please visit catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. Now, our guest today is Douglas Vermeeren. Douglas is the author of a new book, Personal Power Mastery, which if you're a fan of Napoleon Hill, you're going to love hearing about this new book. Now, Douglas Vermeeren is the producer and director of 3 out of the top 10 personal development movies ever filmed, the author of 3 books in the Guerrilla Marketing series, and a regular featured expert on Fox, CNN, ABC, NBC, CTV, and CBC, as well as others. Douglas has made an aggressive study of success by reading more than 7,500 books on success, goal setting, achievement, and psychology, and he's compiled this information for you in his new book, Personal Power Mastery. You can find out more about Douglas at his website, douglasvermeeren.com. Welcome, Douglas.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
And will you share for our audience your other website about Personal Power Mastery?
Yes, personalpowermastery.co.
Okay. Now, tell us about how you came to write this book, because, many of us are raving fans of Napoleon Hill.
Sure.
And so how did you come to
Sure. Well,
process?
yeah, in the brief introduction, you mentioned that I had read more than 7,500 books on success. And I think that that's really actually just part of how this book came about. There's actually a lot bigger connection to Napoleon Hill than most people realize. In fact, I was raised in a middle-class family. My father worked in construction. My mother babysat children at the home. We weren't extremely wealthy, and their idea of working smarter was actually working harder. So I took a job selling pest control in California when I was in college, approximately. And while I was there, I was working harder, but it wasn't really working for me. If any of your audience have ever done door-to-door sales, it can be very frustrating and discouraging. And so, to be honest, I was about to quit. And at the point of, no return, I had a family friend share with me 2 books. And he said that you really need to take a look at these because they're going to change your life. The first book was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. The second book, yes, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Now, for those in your audience that aren't familiar with Think and Grow Rich, essentially Napoleon Hill wrote that book after interviewing more than 400 of the world's top achievers. People like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, the Rockefellers, the Wright brothers, many of these top achievers that we know today. And so when I read that book from Napoleon Hill, really it changed my life. It was kind of the catalyst for everything. I kind of really recognized, first off, that I had more power within me than I had previously realized. I had a stronger belief in my own personal success by the time I was finished. And the second really big thing that happened is I kind of got curious. You see, when we watch a movie, we know that there's certain things that don't make it into the film, right? Like they wind up in the cutting room floor. And so I wondered, what would it have been like to, for example, sit with the Wright brothers, interview them, get to know them, talk to them, but what wouldn't they have told us in the book that occurred? Like, what were the lessons that were happening that never made it into any of these things that Napoleon Hill had created? And so I decided as a 19-year-old that what I wanted to do is I wanted to go out and study some of the world's top achievers. And I wanted to do it in person. So again, the interviews and the research that I did in the books were one thing, but the real basis for personal power mastery are these in-person interviews. So I went out and I started interviewing some of the world's top achievers wherever I could find them. And I would often ask them at the conclusion of the interviews, who else do you know that I should talk to? And so I would start getting interviewed with more and more and more top achievers. And so I eventually got to people like Warren Buffett, Richard Branson, Donald Trump, Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres. The list goes on and on of people that had created multi-billion-dollar brands, everything from FedEx to Nike to Reebok to Aveda to Christian Dior to Hugo Boss to Uber to Ugg boots to you name it. And so as I interviewed those people, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, because as you mentioned, I was reading the books at the same time as I was meeting the real live people. And I found that in some cases, there was a lot of stuff that was validated. things that they did in their lives that actually did make it into those success books. But at the same time, I also found that there was a lot that they do that, quite frankly, the success books never reveal. And I think part of the reason why is, and I'm not saying this to be critical, I'm saying this to be honest, is most of the people writing the success books have never, ever achieved massive success in their life in any capacity. And so when I was comparing, for example, millionaires, billionaires, gold medal Olympians, professional athletes, people that won Academy Awards, Grammys, like these were the kinds of people I was meeting in real life. When I was comparing that with what some of the life coaches or business coaches or people were writing, it didn't ring true. And so really what I chose to do was experiment, first of all, myself and see if I could systematize what these top leaders were teaching me. And for me personally, that created an extremely large amount of wealth in a very short period of time. As a 19-year-old, I did about $1.6 million in my first 6 months, which is about $9,000 a day. And I haven't looked back. And in addition to that, there's been other success that we've created and other achievements that I've created. As you mentioned, our movies and some of the other things that we've been able to do. But I've noticed that there's really some patterns of success, some systems of success that the top achievers use that most of the success books didn't have. And that's what we unfold in Personal Power Mastery.
That's so really exciting. And for our audience, what are the 3 top movies that you helped produce and direct?
Yeah, actually, I kind of co-produced them. The other co-producer was actually my wife. And so the 3 that I did, the first one that I did was called The Opus. And The Opus is actually considered by most people to be the sequel to the film The Secret. And it talks about how to go from a vision of what you want to turning it into a workable plan and ultimately performance. And in that film, we have such luminaries as Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, John DeMartini, Joe Vitale, Bob Doyle, Marcy Shimoff, Morris Goodman. The list goes on. Just some really incredible people. The second, and by the way, I should mention with that film, we were fortunate enough, Random House picked it up and did 23 languages worldwide with it. So it was just amazing. Our second book, second movie was an interesting one because as I, again, read all the success materials and compared them to what top achievers did, one big principle that success books never, ever, ever talk about is the principle of gratitude. And all of the top achievers, especially when you're meeting someone like Oprah Winfrey, they practice gratitude on a massively high level. And they understand that what we're grateful for actually expands in our life. So if you want to have better relationships, more abundance, better health, better connection to self and self-worth and self-confidence, it really starts with being grateful for what exists in the present. And so I decided for my second movie, we needed to expose that. So I did a movie called The Gratitude Experiment. And that movie features people like Bob Proctor, Mary Morrissey, John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Marie Diamond from The Secret, John DeMartini, and others. And so it's really quite a powerful film because I believe that gratitude is probably the most powerful principle on the planet. The third movie that we had just completed, and it came out not too long ago, was called The Treasure Map. And as you can imagine, one of the things that a lot of people ask me about is specifically dealing with wealth and finance. Now, here's something I'll just maybe share too, because I know that a lot of your audience are natural healers. And as I've traveled the world, especially for, every continent and including the UK, in fact, I was in the UK 23 times last year in 12 months. So I'm there quite regularly. I'm back in London, in fact, in December, at the end of November, December. But I found that a lot of natural healers really have a bit of a challenge with this idea of money, that they still think that money is kind of evil or that it's not going to support them or they shouldn't be seeking after it or they're bad people if they are. Well, I'm here to tell you 2 things about that. One, the book, The Science of Getting Rich, that The Secret was based on, and it talks about the energy and the harmony of the universe in how it corresponds in terms of an abundance kind of perception, right? And what Wallace D. Wattles said in that book was, whatever may be said in praise of poverty, the fact remains that a person is not truly successful until they are rich. Now, I want to qualify what the word rich means. Yes, it can mean abundance, and it should mean abundance in your life, but it means all other things in terms of opportunity, time, freedom, your connection with others, your connection with yourself. This is a sense of abundance and richness. And for you as a healer, if you're broke right now and you don't feel like you have enough, you can never attract what you criticize. And you also can't have one foot in scarcity and expect to get abundance. So you need to start deciding right now that if you're going to serve your clients in the best and strongest way possible, you've got to bring abundance into your life first, because health and healing and nurturing and giving are all forms of abundance. And you will never do that effectively until you embrace all abundance. So that's just a thought for you to think about. Now, that last movie that we did, just to share, it's called The Treasure Map, and it focuses on this mindset of abundance. It does share a lot about money, which the truth of the matter is if you own a business, you don't get the privilege to continue unless you make a profit. And so you need to understand that the money is an important part. Money will open up doors for you and provide vehicles. And you've already heard this idea that money really represents the value that you give back to the world. Well, if you do have something valuable as a healer, as a coach, as a teacher, as a mentor, then it's your duty to demonstrate to others that you are a light. And by doing that, the only way you can do that is by showing that you know how to attract abundance in all its forms. So you cannot shun money. You can't say money is bad. You need to be accepting of that. And you also need to understand that you can never expand who you are and what you do until you have those elements of your life covered. In other words, you can't expand what you have before you expand who you are, and you can't expand who you are until you fully embrace all abundance and allow that expansion to happen. In fact, it was interesting when we were doing the movie The Opus, one of my favorite interviews was with Jack Canfield, who you remember from The Secret. And he pointed out something interesting. He said, ever since the Big Bang, the universe has been expanding. Everything's been expanding. And if you choose to not expand with it, again, which includes all forms of abundance, you're technically fighting against an expanding universe. You're fighting against the whole program. So you've got to be willing to accept and embrace this expansion in all forms on how it appears in our life. And money is one of them. So those are our three movies. And we're working on a new one right now. In fact, I just shot Bob Proctor and John DeMartini for it a couple of weeks ago. And it's called How Thoughts Become Things. You remember in The Secret, they say thoughts become things. This movie will explain how. And so we're very excited about that one. And who knows, maybe we'll come back on the show and talk about that as it comes out.
Oh, please do. And, I just really want to second what you're saying about the deep connection between money and health. First of all, myself, I own my house, I own my car, I'm completely debt-free. I have a pretty good net worth. I have investments at Morgan Stanley. And I coach lots of other holistic practitioners of all kinds because, again, of what you're talking about. And it's very hard to help other people with their health if you're in survival mode yourself. Yeah. And also there's a very deep connection, I find, between people's relationship with money and their relationship with their health. And I in fact, I have an entire manual on clearing money issues. So there's huge connection between, your personal relationship with actual money. And I'm talking about cash, money, investments, savings, all of it, and your health. And there, in addition to that, there's a relationship between money and food. And most people with food issues have very deep scarcity issues. And also there's a huge relationship between money and personal intimate relationship issues. So there's many times when I'm starting out as a medical intuitive healer and people are coming to me to resolve their deep health issues. But before I can resolve their health issues, I've got to work with them on their beliefs about money, their relationship with money, how they're handling their money.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, again, as you talk about healers, I've got a saying that we share, like I do a training called Your First Million's on the Way, where I teach you exactly what the top achievers taught me, how to really build a million in a hurry. And one of the first things that we tell people is that a lifeguard can't save others till they save themselves or know how to swim. And so we need to understand that all success really starts with you. You can't really give away what you don't have. And I love what Jim Rohn one time said too, because I believe that, one of the reasons that I personally like to make money is I like to give back and I like to create legacy and I like to take care of others around me and, take care of charities and schools and things of this nature. But you can't give from an empty piggy bank. This is what Jim Rohn says. You can't give from an empty piggy bank.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so important that if we want to become these healers, that we need to really understand that in all aspects, we need to have as much good within us and as much light, with as much power, as much resources, as much everything within us to be able to give back. And we can't be selective and say, well, you know, one thing that's empowering is good and another thing that is empowering is not good. The truth of the matter is they're all reflections of who we are, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree. And you know, the way I like to explain it to my clients is that you've got in the very back of your brain, you've got reptilian reflexes. And the first reptilian reflex, the first thing that the reptile needs is to feel safe. In our culture, that has to do with your relationship with money. And everybody thinks, well, it's about having more money. Well, yeah, it can, but it's really about, again, your relationship to it. And when you heal your relationship to money and get out of survival mode and get out of scarcity mode, then you can have this very vibrant health that we're talking about. Now, once the reptile feels safe, then they can eat. So that's why if I'm working with anybody with any kind of disordered eating pattern, any anorexia, bulimia, overweight, it all goes back to the relationship with money. And once the reptile feels safe and has eaten, then they can have relationships. So again, lots of people who are having trouble in their personal relationships, in their intimate relationships, as they heal these foundational issues, then they can move forward. Now let's talk about your wonderful new book, Personal Power Mastery. And I'm going to show it for people who can see on the video. What exactly is Personal Power Mastery?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Again, it really outlines the patterns that successful people truly use, that they really use in the real world. It's not theory. In fact, it's funny, we've been, before we released the book, it took us a long time to decide to do that. We've been teaching this for about 10 years, and I wanted to make sure that I had the most powerful and useful tools that people could use to transform their life. And I think even the title was very carefully selected, right? You know, if you think about it, all success does start personally. And one of the things that we teach in the training, because there's a lot of people that want to change certain circumstances in their life. Maybe like you're saying, they want to have better relationships. They want to have more abundance. They want to have better health. They want to have better connection to themselves. Well, here's the thing is that in the context of personal power mastery, all changes really begin by making it personal. In fact, we say that if you own it, you can change it. And there's many people who try to delegate or to share that success burden, if you will, with the outside world. They say, you know, the market's not right. The people in my family treated me poorly. My situation's garbage. And, you know, so we've really got to understand that until we take something personally, we actually have no power over it. We must take it personally. Then there's that second word, power. And power actually means the ability or capacity to take action. And so within the book, I share some very specific things that you can take action with and that you can take action upon so that you can immediately start leveling up your life. And like I said earlier, that, you know, in fact, here's maybe a better way to say it. This comes from my wife. You've heard the saying that says actions speak louder than words. Well, being actually speaks even louder than actions. And so here's the deal, is that we need to really understand the power that we have to become, to tap into our greatest brilliance, to really step beyond our current capacity in a very specific way to be able to become more powerful. And one thing I'm going to suggest right away that I think is incorrect is a lot of gurus that are out there are telling people to become successful, you need to step outside of your comfort zone. And I'm here to say that that's not quite true. In fact, if you look at all the top achievers that I interviewed, what they did is they stepped into what I call their brilliance zone. The thing that they were really good at, really passionate about, really purposeful about, and that passion and purpose also served other people. And that's where they chose to get uncomfortable. And when they got uncomfortable within their brilliance zone, that's when success really began to occur. See, if we try to become uncomfortable in all aspects of our life, you know, we're going to be spinning our wheels. Like, for example, I don't do my own dental work. It would be foolish for me to try and become uncomfortable there, step out of my comfort zone to learn that skill. It would waste everyone's time, and it would definitely be painful for me. So we need to understand what's brilliant for us. Now, the last aspect of that title is mastery. So personal power and mastery. And mastery is a very unique word. In fact, one of my favorite ways to kind of unfold it comes from an interview with Pablo Picasso. Remember the painter? And one time someone asked him, my goodness, how is it that you're able to be such a master? And what his response was, It's not mastery, it's persistence. And if you saw how I tried so hard with everything I do, you'd recognize that that's how I'm able to level up what I do. And I think that this is a thing that most people get incorrectly, is they assume that top achievers are perfectionists. They assume that everything has to be right, and they're not. And as I've watched people, not only those that we interviewed as top achievers, but over the last decade, we've been interviewing and working with students from around the world in almost every country of the globe. I've been teaching this as a seminar around the world. And right now, I'm grateful we're rated as the #3 personal development seminar out of all the seminars that are out there. So we've seen a lot of people come through. And one of the big things that I see that's kind of challenging is people know where they want to go sometimes as a goal. But it's like they're sitting on their couch waiting for someone to telephone them and tell them that all the lights are green on the road to get there before they'll get into their car. And the truth of the matter is we know that, like, if one of these listeners today knew that they had to get to an appointment, you don't wait for all the lights to get green before you hop in your car. But too many people do that in their life. And so we just need to get started. And we find that top achievers are not perfectionists, they're improvisers. And they're very good at finding solutions very quickly to things that come at them unexpectedly. And the better we get at that, the stronger that muscle becomes, and we can solve problems quicker. Now, one thing I do want to point out, though, in personal power mastery, you'll notice that I don't suggest that you have to solve all the problems alone or by yourself. In fact, one of the things that I think is really important is you heard this saying that says your net worth equals your network. So when you have the right people surrounding you, you become a combination of, say, the 5 people you spend the most time with. In fact, one of the billionaires I interviewed had said it this way. He said, if you hang out with 4 losers, you become the 5th. So you don't want to do that. But aside from the financial reflection of what your network does, most people don't understand that your network is also a safety net, which means that you now have the capacity and the ability to solve bigger problems than you've ever solved before. It's kind of like what Henry Ford did. When he had a problem, he had his little switchboard and he would hit the button and bring someone with an answer immediately. Well, when you have a stronger network, a higher level network, you can start to solve bigger problems. So again, top achievers aren't perfectionists. If anything, they're improvisers who gather others around them who are really great at improvising too.
I just love your stories. And what's so funny is I was literally just telling the Henry Ford story to one of my clients this morning, because he's looking for a job. And I'm like, you don't have to know everything. Nobody knows everything.
Yeah.
Now, so Douglas Vermeeren, I know that you personally practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes, I do.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your practice of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and how this relates to your own personal power mastery?
Oh, very cool. Well, I started martial arts when I was a young kid, so I've practiced quite a few different martial arts, but I definitely am a big fan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I've been doing that for a handful of years now. In fact, I even compete too. But the one thing that I think, if there's people in your audience that are listening today that are martial arts, you're going to understand this probably a little bit more clearly than others. But let me maybe frame it this way. There's a saying that says, or that people often ask martial artists, they say, well, how long does it take the average person to get a black belt? And our answer as martial artists is, average people don't get black belts because you have to expand who you are. You need to become bigger than you currently are. And I think martial arts is a great analogy for life because, as we expand kind of who we are, we also begin to understand what we're still lacking. And we also begin to understand the importance of our own personal connection to that mission. For example, one of my favorite sayings is a samurai saying that says, when we defeat the enemy within, no enemy without can harm us. And I really found that to be true in martial arts, but I've also found that to be extremely true in real life. When we have an activity that we need to do in real life and we begin to doubt ourselves internally and we begin to question who we are and we begin to, have these fears and challenges that are there, oftentimes we eliminate ourselves from even trying, right? And so I think that is one thing. I guess Warren Buffett said it this way. He said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's swimming naked. And I'm going to say that that's really the same as martial arts. When you are, someone can talk a big game, someone can talk how great they are and how wonderful they are. But when they actually get into the ring or on the mat, it's like talk is cheap. right? And I think that this is the same in real life, is that, those that are really made of something quite strong inside, they will show up when the times get tough, and they will be able to work through. And perseverance is a big part of success. And I think that that's something that anyone who's involved in anything, whether it's martial arts or piano lessons or whatever it is that you enjoy, there's perseverance required if you're going to create success in your life.
Yeah, and I think this all relates to natural healing, because when you're really looking at healing something significant, whether it's cancer or diabetes or being overweight, or Crohn's or colitis, you literally
Mm.
cannot be the same person when
Yeah,
you're healed as you were when you started having the problem. You've,
that's definitely true.
yeah. Now, so how do you feel personal power mastery relates to the field of natural healing?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I think something that we need to kind of maybe understand, and I'm trying to think of the best way to maybe give this in context. There's really what I call the 5 pillars of success. And how we came up with this is, in my interviews with the top 400 achievers, I would ask, what their main goals were, their main purpose. As we've taught, now students around the world, we'd ask the same question. And we found that people generally answer that their goals are in one of these 5 areas. And it's interesting that the goal that they shares also where they're unbalanced at the time, because all 5 of these areas do apply to us at one point in our life. So here are the 5 areas. The first one is what we call connection to self, or again, self-worth, self-confidence, self-fulfillment, etc. And we have people again that say, well, my goal is to be more confident. Well, that shows that in that area, they're unbalanced. The second one is what we call spirituality. Spirituality doesn't necessarily mean a particular faith or religion. It really means our connection to things of the spirit, our connection to ethics, our connection to the universe and the world around us. The next one is what we call health. And health is, I think, an area that you guys talk about quite a bit. But that doesn't just mean, again, healing maladies that we might have. It can also mean such things as losing weight, quit smoking, become more fit, eat better, treat ourselves physically on a better level. The next 2 are what we call relationships and abundance. And relationships really have to do with not only our relationship to our, say, significant other, or our children, or our parents, or our siblings, but also everyone that we connect with, the people in our community, the people in our business, the people in our life. That's the relationships that we have. And lastly, abundance. And again, that doesn't just mean wealth. That can mean all aspects of an abundant life. So everything from our money to our free time to our opportunities to you name it. And the interesting thing about this, if we now just quickly go around that cycle, they're all connected. And if you want to experience pain, the key is to take shortcuts for immediate gratification. So in other words, if you don't go through improving yourself, taking care of your spirituality and your health and your relationships, and you go straight to wealth or abundance, and you try and skip through all that to be unfaithful to who you really believe you are and untrue to what you really believe, to put your health secondary and to destroy your relationships, all to get to abundance, you're eventually going to find unhappiness. And the same is true of all of those. If you're just focused on yourself or your own self-worth and self-confidence, you'll never find it. By the way, here's an interesting insight. Most people, when they talk about this one, say, oh, you've got to find your passion and your purpose. Well, the truth of the matter is that's very selfish. And you'll never be fulfilled if you're just looking for your own passion and purpose. Where you'll be fulfilled is where your passion and purpose overlap the passion and purpose of those that you want to connect with, right? So I'm not saying you need to agree or dial into something that everybody loves, but when you find a group that has the same passion and purpose as you do, and that overlaps, you'll find that your relationships are better. You'll also find that your abundance comes more freely. Your health everything comes when you can make that connection and they overlap, right? So all of those things need to be serviced when it comes to our personal power mastery. We need to find balance. Now, the thing that I guess we need to point out, and this is something I've observed, is that I haven't yet met anyone in the world that is completely balanced in all 5. We generally bounce between them all. One day you might feel not so great about yourself, but tomorrow you do. The next day you might feel pretty good about your health. Maybe the next day you don't. Or something arrives in your health that you didn't expect. Same thing again about relationships or abundance or spirituality. These are always in constant motion. And so our abilities as humans are, how do we use, again, that word personal, to be able to personally get involved, and then power to be able to act on our own, to be able to create some form of mastery to create balance between those four. And again, like I said, it's not a consistent, it's something we have to work at every single day. It's just part of being human, right?
Yeah, I just love what you're saying, Douglas Vermeeren. Now, when you wrote your book, Personal Power Mastery, you know, my experience is writing a book. You can't be the same person at the end who you were at the beginning, right? It changes you. You know, as you develop insights. What do you feel is the most important lesson from the book?
Wow, that's a great one. Um, I think the most important lesson is really maybe the first power. Let me explain. The first power is the power of choice. And I think a lot of people don't think of this. Now, when I went out and did the interviews with the 400 top achievers, most people don't know that I also went out and I did a bunch of other interviews as well. And there were several groups. I interviewed, obviously, a lot of people wanting to make personal change in their life, but I also interviewed a lot of people, including thought leaders and others that facilitated change. Now, I also interviewed some people that you would consider that are highly involved in change. Let me maybe share one example, and this will lead into the power of choice. If you think about it, there's one occupation, if you will, that is really focused on making change quickly. And if they don't do it very well, someone gets hurt. And what I'm talking about is the suicide hotline. Now, if you think about it, when someone is in distress or in like totally distraught nature, and they're at their wit's end and they're ready to take their life, this is the time they call the suicide hotline, if we're lucky. And as I was talking about this with a person who trains suicide hotline operators, she made it even more clear that sometimes people call them and they've even got a weapon in their hands. They're looking to hurt themselves. They've got a plan. It's sometimes very difficult to talk them out of that. And so, in my opinion, these are masters of change. They know how to get someone to change their thinking immediately. So when I was speaking with this friend of mine that's an operator, I said to her, tell me a little bit about the training that you guys do for the operators to help them be successful in facilitating change. And she said something very startling to me. I didn't see this coming. She said, we can tell them anything that we'd like, except for one thing. I said, well, okay, you've got my attention. What's the one thing? And she said, the one thing that we cannot say to a person calling in is don't kill yourself. And I was like, what? Like, that's the first thing that I would say, right? Don't kill yourself, right? And she says, well, the reason we can't say that is because we are taking away their choice when we do that. And a reason why a person would call in ready to take their life and the situation that they're in is because they feel like they have no choice. They feel like all their choices are now gone. The only choice I have is to remove myself from the equation. So she says the most dangerous thing we can do is to take away even further choices and reinforce that idea. So she says what we do instead is we help them to start to see choices they have. And as they gain choices, they gain power. This is an interesting concept, right? So in other words, we will tell them, yes, you could kill yourself, but here's what the consequence looks like. You could also choose to stay around. Here's what that consequence looks like. Or you could choose to get help, which is what you're doing now, talking to me. Here's how that looks like. And the more choices that we help a person to see again, to regain into their life, the more power they gain. Now, what's interesting is as we learned that concept, I began to share it at our seminars. And this is why it's become the number one power, right? We have had people through who've had foreclosures, bankruptcies, divorce, terminal illness, other health issues. They've lost loved ones, maybe even had a parent who lost a child to a drunk driver. I mean, all these things that you'd think there's no choice. There's nothing. I'm stuck there and that's all I have. Well, interestingly enough, that's not true. And in fact, we have many choices that are still there. We just often don't see them. But as those choices reappear in our life, as we begin to see those choices again, we suddenly regain the power to take personal power in the situation. And it's so interesting to notice that dynamic switch, to see someone, and we've seen this a million times in our seminars, someone who comes in extremely discouraged and distraught. And I have had suicidal people who've come out to these events. But as they begun to see choice and the power of choice, their life, their countenance, their total situation has immediately changed. and that power has flowed back into them. So I guess this is one thing I'm going to challenge your audience. If you're someone in the audience right now that, I'm not saying you necessarily have to be suicidal, but maybe you are, or maybe you're going through a difficult business situation, or maybe it's a relationship challenge, or maybe you've just lost a loved one, or maybe you've just been diagnosed with something terrible. Look at the choices that you still have. And you'll see that as you begin to list those choices, the power will flow back into your life. And I think that that's probably the most powerful beginning towards your personal power mastery. Now, I want to point out something also, is that I'm not saying you have to take those choices as you list them, but just knowing that they're there for you gives you the power. Now, one other thing maybe that I'll just share on this idea of choice, which I think is very powerful. When I talk to a lot of people about what they think success means to them, and many of them say success is being happy. And that's a pretty good definition. Now, if we look at what most people say about happiness, they say happiness is a choice. I'm here to tell you that that's partially true. Happiness is partially a choice. You see, my definition also involves consequence, right? Because a choice is the beginning of consequence. And so my definition of happiness, my definition of success, is that you have peace with the choice and the consequence that follows. And so the more choices that we can make that lead to consequences of peace and self-fulfillment, spiritual connection, happiness and health, happiness in our relationships, happiness in our abundance, the more choices we make that provide consequences that give us that kind of feeling of I'm going to use the word value, but it's not the right word, that we feel value and attached to it, the happier we'll be and the more successful we will be.
You know, I just really appreciate what you're saying because, and I'm going to tie it back for our audience back to natural healing, because every day you get to make a choice about what vibration you live in. And I know myself, when I literally open my eyes, that's the first thing that I do is raise my vibration as high as possible so that I start my day in this state. And I think that has a huge relationship with your health. The next movie that you're working on is about how thoughts become things. And every thought that you think creates biochemical reactions in your body. And I say, if you don't believe me, think about biting into a lemon. When you think about biting into a lemon, you have an instantaneous feeling in your mouth, and that creates something. So when we really look into natural healing, a lot of it is about making a choice to be healthy, making a choice to be happy, making choices to eat well, to treat ourselves well, to treat our bodies well, to treat the planet well. So there's a big connection here. Now, I know that you interviewed a lot of people for your book. By the way, your interview is definitely in my top 5 of interviews for the Natural Healing Show. I really appreciate what
we're having fun.
Yeah, we're having fun. And it's very important messages that you're giving. Who was your favorite interview in the book?
Oh, wow. You know, what's so funny is that changes almost every time I think about who it could be, because of what's happening in my life and what I've learned and what's going on. There were so many that were powerful people to me that were just life-changing. And many of them, in fact, probably aren't really well known publicly. There are people who are, how should we say, private and quiet billionaires that people wouldn't know. If I had to name, I guess there's a few that I really, put it this way, a lot of these achievers that I interviewed became close friends and almost like family, and have kind of brought me into their life almost like in a grandfatherly type fashion. And so I've got a few that it's almost like saying, pick your favorite grandpa. And you can't do it, right? But there's a few that have really become very close to me and friends that will be with me forever. If we're talking about the thought leaders, John DeMartini has become my best friend, and you will know him from The Secret. Bob Proctor has also become my best friend. In fact, he wrote the foreword on this book, you'll notice, and he wrote the foreword on a few of my other books. And so we've just had some incredibly deep conversations. But if we talked from a business point of view, I'd say that it would probably be Frank Mcguire. And Frank Mcguire, for those who are not familiar with that name in the audience, he was actually at ABC when it was radio and became TV. and he gave Alan Alda, Charles Osgood, and Ted Koppel their first jobs. He was also the philosophy teacher for Marilyn Monroe and got to know her quite well. He was also one of Elvis Presley's best friends. He was the VP of marketing for American Airlines. He worked in the White House under JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson on the press team. He was the former VP of all of marketing for KFC, and he was one of the 4 founders of Federal Express. And this was like my grandpa. In fact, I'm in my house right now, and Frank used to come over to our home, and in the front room there, he'd play the piano at Christmas time. And on that couch right over there, he would take naps at Thanksgiving after we'd have our Thanksgiving dinner. And, and at this very table where we're at right now, I remember my wife was cooking here in this kitchen, and his wife and I, and we were all having a discussion at this table. Now, Frank's passed on now, so, he means a lot to me. But there were so many little lessons that he gave me that, in fact, didn't even make it into the book. So here, I'll even let you behind the scenes on one of them. I remember one time that we were sitting having a milkshake, and he asked me, what's the most expensive thing in the world? I said, well, I don't know. And I kind of listed a few things, like with a Hope Diamond maybe, or, all these things. And I was making jokes too about things. And he said, no, the most expensive thing in the world is ignorance. Mm. And why? Because it keeps you from making money. It costs you money. But the most important thing is it costs you time. It costs you time. And time is the one thing you'll never get back. And now that he's passed away, I realize that even more so. That when we have lost that time, there's nothing you can do to get it back. And so I think one big message that all of, the listeners maybe should hear, and one that I try to share all the time is, you've got one life and you're a brilliant individual. The universe has told you this already. Every day you're getting whispers of things that you can do and who you can be and what, you could expand upon. Don't waste the time, because that's the only tool that you really need to make this work. And if you don't use the time to make that expansion, you're never going to be given that opportunity again. In fact, I always tell my students at Personal Power Mastery, the most fragile word, the most fragile, breakable word in the entire English language is the word now. And even as we say it, like if we don't take advantage of now, even as we say the word now, it's gone. And now isn't, like you see people when they say, that nice little poster with the kitty cat on it, that if you take the word now and you spin it around, it spells one, W-O-N. But the truth of the matter is that's not true. One person doesn't have to win for another person to lose or whatever, right? We can all win in many things in life, but that N-O-W actually stands for something even more powerful, and that's no other way. If you're not going to do it now, you've got no other way. You must. And so it's very important that we recognize that time is our most important asset.
I really love that message. And, I had a professor from Brown who was like the father I always wanted, but never had. So I can appreciate, and he's gone, but I still remember that. And having a mentor is so essential, I think, when you want to move ahead. Now, your program, Personal Power Mastery, how does your program and your book, Personal Power Mastery, differ from other personal development tools today?
Wow. And this is a question that we get all the time. Obviously, those that attend, they see it immediately. But the biggest thing is again, most of the personal power or personal development programs that are in the world today are people who are sharing what they've learned from some other guru. So in other words, you're getting a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy because they read someone else's book. In fact, we saw this a lot when The Secret came out. The movie The Secret about the law of attraction came out, and suddenly everyone was a law of attraction coach. Or people go and attend and visit somebody like Tony Robbins. They get very inspired and powered up. So all of a sudden they become a life or a business coach. Or they read a really good book and they think that they can teach or train it. And that's not the case. So like I said, when I did my interviews directly with the 400 of the world's top achievers in person firsthand, it was exactly what Napoleon Hill did. There's never been anybody that's done that since Napoleon Hill. And there are a lot of things that we discovered that are not correct in the books today. There's a lot of stuff that you guys are being told that is just not true. And that's why, you see people who are doing this write it down, set a date, goal setting system, or this smart, measurable, achievable. Not one top achiever that I interviewed did that. So you guys are getting stuff that is just not working. So if you're really looking to take your life to the next level, you've got to remember that we're human beings, not human doings. And if you do the right thing, in order to get there, you have to be the right thing first. And so personal power mastery starts from the inside out. You need sustainable change. It's not just a matter of shortcutting your way to success. That'll never work. And in fact, I love what Stephen Covey said from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He said, part of the problem too is that most people climb the ladder of success to find it's only leaning against the wrong wall. And so we need to understand first how to find what we really want, what will really make us happy. And then we need to go about creating it in a correct way. It's kind of like the law of the harvest. Right now, everybody has been giving carrot seeds and they're thinking they're planting an apple tree. Well, that's not the way success is. If you want an apple tree, you need apple seeds. And we have them in this program. And to be quite frank, as I've observed others around the world, I don't think there's many that do have these. Most of the programs are missing what you really need to succeed.
Now, Douglas Vermeeren, the author of Personal Power Mastery, any final thoughts for our audience?
Well, I guess two. One, last name's pronounced Vermeeren, but that's okay. It's cool. Everybody gets it incorrect. And, if you remember Personal Power Mastery, it's about you anyways, not about me. Okay, so it's about your personal power. I'm glad to be a facilitator of your change, but it really is going to be about you. And I think the other thing that is really important that we remember is that the universe is an echo chamber. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you approach your own success, your own life with hesitation, with doubt, with fear, and holding back, that's exactly how everything in your life will show up. But if you approach it with boldness, with confidence, knowing that you can have it, if you step up, if you really take the action and the leap of faith, it will appear. The universe is an echo chamber. What you put out comes back. And about this idea of leaping and stepping out, I'll maybe finish with one last thought from the Buddhist monks, and that's leap, and the net will appear. It always does.
Oh, brilliant thoughts. What a wonderful, inspiring message. So you've been listening to Douglas Vermeeren. Did I say that right?
Vermeeren.
Vermeeren.
Yeah.
Oh.
You got it.
And you can find out more about him and his very powerful work at www.douglasvermeeren.com. And the other website that you have is personalpowermastery.com or .co?
.co. Yeah.
.co.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how to heal yourself naturally. And remember, when you take responsibility, like Douglas is talking about, for your health, for your well-being, that's the beginning of natural healing. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.